From the Hype HQ studio in Chicago, Illinois, it's Startup Hype Man, the podcast. Hello, everyone. My name is Raj Nation, and I am the founder of Startup Hype Man. Fast-growing startups work with me because they want to become better storytellers. Whether that's for customers, investors, or a packed audience, they know that story is their ticket to stand out, stand apart, and change the game. And this podcast here is where I talk with entrepreneurs and leaders in the startup ecosystem, ranging from scale stage to early stage, as they share specific strategies that they have executed to stand out across three specific areas: sales, marketing, and people. Before we begin today's episode, remember you can head to startuphypeman.com and subscribe to the newsletter that doesn't suck. You'll get new podcast episodes and timely reads written by me, but also helpful articles from around the web and a notice of upcoming pitch competitions. All right, let's dive in and hear how today's guest is changing the game. Ladies and gentlemen, making his way to the microphone. Born and raised and currently residing in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. He is the founder and chief sales scientist at Cerebral Selling, as well as the author of the best-selling book, Sell the Way You Buy. Please welcome David Priemer.
You know, you told me you were going to do that, but I don't think I was fully prepared for how awesome that was. I think I'm gonna require all podcast hosts to do that from now on. Thanks, man. That was awesome.
It's my job as the hype man to hype up your introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, so he is David Priemer, as I mentioned, founder and chief sales scientist at Cerebral Selling. They help sales reps, leaders, and their organizations supercharge their growth through a combination of training, keynote talks, and consulting. And the result is modern sellers who think like their customers, learn fast, and flat out get those W's, aka signed deals. He also authored the Amazon Canada best-selling book, Sell the Way You Buy. And today our conversation is around the paradox of selling ROI. David, welcome to the show, and let our listeners know why this topic of paradox of ROI selling is on your mind and why it's important to you.
Oh, yeah. Well, look, so thanks for having me here. And yeah, this idea, when we go out and we try to, convert customers and try to convince them that our solution is the best, part of the problem, the challenge is that we are told and conditioned by our leaders to go out and sell value. They say, go out and sell value, sell value. And really what they mean is sell ROI. Like, go tell the customer that if they spend this money with us, they'd be silly not, in fact, to spend this money with us, because if they do, they're either going to make more money or they're going to save more money than what they're spending. And so they're really saying, like, sell ROI. But the reality is, when you actually inspect how people actually make purchasing decisions, we don't make purchasing decisions strictly and solely based on ROI. In fact, we make decisions mostly based on feelings. And that's what I refer to as the paradox of ROI, is that we think oftentimes, oh yeah, we're just selling we're selling value in terms of business value, but that's actually not what people are buying. So that's why it's so important, because it's such a pervasive issue.
This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and we are going to dive deeper into that in a moment. But first, let's learn a little bit more about David the Man, not to be confused with the music artist Portugal the Man.
I don't think anyone's going to be confused, but that's okay.
I'm curious, what is either your favorite book or movie of all time, and why?
Oh my God. I'll tell you, my kids tease me to no end because I actually have very few favorites. I was at, I'm not inciting happy birthday wishes. It was my birthday a couple weeks ago. And
well, I will say happy birthday.
Thank you very much. No, but my kids, they always tease me like, Dad, you're so hard to shop for because you don't want anything. You have no favorites. And it's true. I have, lots of things that I deeply like. People often ask me, for example, what's my favorite sales movie? That's a good one.
Sales movie, as if there's like a whole lot of sales.
There's a spectrum of sales movies for sure. You got your Wolves of Wall Streets and your Boiler Rooms and so on. But I always say my favorite sales movie is Tommy Boy. And some people kind of like, is that a sales movie? And some people are like, hell yeah, that's a sales movie. That's awesome. And the reason I love Tommy Boy is because you have this guy who's what I call an unconscious seller. Meaning he's actually quite good at sales, but he doesn't know the pathways and mechanisms that he has to exploit to be really good. So he's just kind of meandering through, and sometimes he screws up and he's an nincompoop, and sometimes he crushes it. But then at the end, he realizes his genius. And so I actually think it's a funny movie. Check it out. We all miss Chris Farley, but also, it's a great, analogy to how modern sellers need to operate.
That's interesting. I would view it through the lens of it being a kind of a sales lesson, but I don't think I thought about it to that depth that you just explained. As we all know, if you've seen the movie, you can get a good look at a piece of meat by sticking your head up a bull's ass.
That's right.
Take the butcher's word for it.
And I'll tell you, just for if you want a quick book plug, one of my favorite books is Dan Pink's To Sell Is Human. Mm-hmm. I think he does an awesome. I'm a big Dan Pink fan, but I think he does an awesome job of synthesizing the world of sales because he's not a salesperson, although he does a fantastic job of sourcing tons of sales insights and data and describing how just normal everyday people, while not in official sales roles, find themselves in selling situations all the time and kind of what general society thinks about that.
Mm-hmm. When you're not obsessing over sales, how do you unplug or how do you disconnect?
Well, that's a problem, Raj. I mean, I got to tell you, so I've been doing this for 20 years. I'm a startup guy and it's kind of fun. So I do things, for fun. But I love what I do. I spend a lot of time thinking and operating on my business and just kind of, this whole mindset of modern selling. But, I'm a good Canadian boy. So I played hockey for about 40 years. Stopped a few years ago just because my kids' activities took over. But I love to play hockey. I love to cook. I'm the cook in the family. And I also love to kind of, tinker and build things. I think it's a bit of like my engineering background and curiosity. I love to get the drill out and fix things and build things. But yeah, I think when you think about my academic background was in chemistry and engineering, and which is kind of cooking. And then I love to cook and tinker. You find as you get older, you have kind of a common thread that tends to permeate your life, and it takes time to kind of see these common threads. But then you realize kind of what it is that you love.
Well, let's see if we can create a common thread here. Engineering and chemistry, hockey, and sales. What do you feel is the common thread amongst those things?
I think I go back to actually, Dan Pink's book, Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. And this idea of mastery. Like, I think, curiosity and mastery, you're always trying to figure out how to get better at something and optimize something. And I love to be able to. I'm a sucker, by the way, from books perspective. I'm a sucker for books or knowledge that explains the science and the why behind things that we see in everyday life, right? So, like one of my other favorite books is Thinking Fast and Slow, where kind of Daniel Kahneman kind of unpacks all of these things that we unconsciously don't know, we don't internalize. And so I think that's the common thread, chemistry, engineering, like, why does this happen? Why does that happen? I did computer modeling as part of a master's degree. It's just, I get very, very curious, but I actually that's the common thread, I feel, but the mastery around it, because you're never really done, like you're never really finished cooking. You're never really finished building things. You're never really finished sales, because it's not like, math or medicine. And I'm not saying those professions and spaces don't change. But sales changes so much, partially because buyers and buyer behavior changes so much. So you find that people that ran tactics 5-10 years ago, those tactics don't work anymore. And so that's, I think, what keeps us going in sales, is kind of that curiosity and kind of drive to win by figuring out kind of the pathways and mechanisms by which we do that. So that, for me, it's like a big chew toy for my brain. I love it.
Yeah. Oh, and I would say too that hockey is a physical representation of pathways, right, and maneuvers to ultimately, quote unquote, score or win, right, which is what you're trying to do in sales as well. Now, let's talk about how you got into sales, because you have a pretty storied sales career in several organizations. You co-founded a company called Ripple, which was ultimately acquired by Salesforce. You then did sales at Salesforce. You were VP of sales at Influitive. You also lecture on sales at Queen's University. So, you have this engineering and chemistry degree. How does sales enter your life in the first place?
Doesn't that seem like a natural transition to you, Raj? I don't know. Just, doesn't everyone do that?
No, I will say, though, a previous company I worked at, the chief revenue officer who was brought in while I was there was also an engineering major in college, and then ended up being at Oracle and stuff, and had a long sales career. So there's clearly some direct link here that more than one person has made, and I want to know how did it come about?
We should be doing more recruiting at engineering schools, I think, for sales. Well, no, no one gets into sales on purpose. I always talk about this. I started in science and engineering, but everyone started in something unrelated to sales, because you can't generally take sales in school. in part of the beauty and the challenge with sales is that there's such a low bar. There's no qualifications. I'm grateful now, actually, some schools are starting to teach it. I think in my book, I talk about how 4,000 universities in the U.S. have business programs, but only about 100 or so, this was a year or two ago, had anything to do with sales. So we don't teach it. I got into sales at the turn of the dot-com boom. So 1999, 2000, I was finishing up my graduate work here at the University of Toronto. And part of the catalyst was, as you're trying to think about, like, what are you going to do like after this? Is this what I'm going to do? I'm going to be in academia? Is that what I'm going to do? You kind of start looking for clues in what other people are doing. And I remember there was an engineering grad that came back for like a career fair talk. And I remember he was working at McKinsey Consulting at the time. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is cool. I didn't even know you can go into business from sales. Like, that's really interesting. And so it kind of piqued my curiosity into getting more into the kind of the business side of things. And I ended up actually interviewing at a bunch of companies, got a job at IBM as a sales engineer. And I got this job about 8 months before I was scheduled to graduate. So I was just kind of coasting to the finish line. And a few weeks before I was supposed to start my job at IBM, I got hooked up with this young entrepreneur who was helping start a startup in Toronto. There's about 20 people there at the time. And I'm like, oh, this is 99, 2000. The dot-com boom thing is happening. I'm like, you know what? Maybe I should just do this instead. I was 25. I'm like, okay, like what do I have to lose? So I did. I said, no thanks, IBM. I joined this startup as a sales engineer. So I was doing, shout out also to all the sales engineers out there. I think it's a hugely, underappreciated entry point into the sales profession, because oftentimes people think, oh, I got to be a BDR, SDR, and that's great. But you can, I started my career as a sales engineer, doing demos and custom coding and config and being in front of customers and seeing how this, because we were partnered with sales reps. It was an enterprise sales game. So seeing how the sales reps executed. So that's where I got hooked. And that business, I learned a ton. We grew it to a $100 million business and 700 people over the course of the next several years. We IPO'd, we got acquired. And that's where I kind of got the sales bug. And actually for the first 8 years of my career, I was a sales engineer and led sales engineering teams. That was my entree to sales from more of the technical side. So super grateful for that intro. And I'm a huge startup advocate. I've obviously worked at big companies. Shout out to my Salesforce friends, but I love startups and all of the awesome things that you learn. Kind of fighting your way out of the bear pit is what I call it. So that's how I got my start.
Let's talk about the creation of Cerebral Selling and the decision to write your book, Sell the Way You Buy. So you've been running Cerebral Selling now for about 2.5 years. Your book came out in the last year. So what made you have the decision to say, I'm going to stop doing this at a company and I'm going to actually build my own company around training these things? And by the way, I'm going to write a book too.
Well, it started a while back. It wasn't just a split second decision. I said, okay, I'm just going to pivot and do this instead. Back at Salesforce, the great thing about Salesforce, when I joined them, there were 6,000 employees there. And when I left, 5 years later, there were 24,000 employees. And now they're, a few years later, they're like 50,000 employees. And, one of the great things is when they bring entrepreneurs in from the outside, they want them to share, some of their insights and perspective, kind of having been on the entrepreneurial customer side. And I was a Salesforce customer many times before I started to work there. So when I was there, I started to write, and I started to, write blog posts, and I wrote for the Salesforce blog. And then, some of the content ended up getting picked up by like Forbes and Entrepreneur. I'm like, oh, like this is kind of cool. And then my leadership team encouraged me. I was running small business sales for the Eastern US at Salesforce, but my leadership team encouraged me. They said, you should be doing like more of this kind of helping and training and bringing the outside perspective. So I did that kind of as a little side hustle, and started, creating these programs, internally and both for customers. And then I left Salesforce after 5 years to be VP of sales at another company, but I kept doing those other things. I kept writing, and I kept, kind of running these little side programs for my teams. And then what I realized was that I had all this content and no home for it. Like I didn't have my own website or blog or anything like that. My content was all over the place. And I said, well, this is dumb, because when my friend Raj calls me up and says, hey, David, can you lay some stuff on me? I'm like, okay, well, I got to send you like 1 million links. I'm like, this is stupid. So I said, I'm just going to create my own website. And so, I go onto GoDaddy and I'm like, okay, let me register for a website. And like, what should I call it? And it was literally just one night. I kind of just thought of the name Cerebral Selling, something selling. Everyone calls it something selling. And because of my science and engineering background, I like to think a lot I'm a bit of an introvert. Someone called me Cerebral once, and it kind of stuck. So I'm like, oh, Cerebral selling. And then the URL was available, and boom, there you went. So what happened was I just took all my content, shoved it on Cerebral selling, and it just started as my website just to have content. And I would write there as I was doing my VP job at this other company. And it was great. It was helpful to my team members, to the community, and people started to subscribe. And I'm like, oh, okay, people are subscribing now. This is going to be a thing. And then I just said, you know what? What am I doing? Like, what's the thing that I love to do most in the world that I'm doing for free off to the side because out of the goodness of my heart, because I love it so much, and people are digging it, right? And so I said, what if this was my business? And so I made the switch, and people say, was that hard? Like, you're leaving a VP of sales job to kind of do your own solo venture, and it's kind of training and consulting. And I say no, like, I never for a second regretted it. I felt empowered and passionate about what I was doing even before I started. So it was the most natural of transitions. But you asked about the book, and part of the challenge is when you're like one guy, like, what can one guy do, right? Like, I don't have a team, I don't have any staff, and my goal was never to have my logo on a building somewhere and make this a big thing per se. But I needed to achieve scale. And so the blog lets me do that. And I started my YouTube channel. And so my YouTube channel, tons of 2-3 minute videos. And you don't have to register for any of this stuff. I give all this stuff away for free. But the book, for me, because I had read so many awesome sales books, and because I felt this is an awesome way of helping achieve scale, and having a great reinforcement for my training after I leave, because some people, they don't read blogs or do videos, but they love books. And this was kind of like a bucket list thing. I'm like, I want to write a book. So every year I have a goal, and this was my goal for kind of 2019. So I started in early 2019 writing the book, and finally published in April 2020. But that was the thing. It was a bucket list thing, a way of achieving scale, getting the message out there, connecting with a new audience, and just kind of being proud of how we can pull all of this, these hopefully helpful insights and content together to change the world of modern selling.
Let's dive into the book then. Oh, by the way, it's funny you said people started naturally saying you're cerebral. Maybe you are a pro wrestler, because the nickname for the pro wrestler Triple H is the Cerebral Assassin. So
that's awesome.
Cerebral Seller would totally be your wrestling name.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the book, you have this whole chapter specifically on the paradox of ROI, and that's our topic for today, is paradox of selling ROI. Let's start here then. Why do you think the natural default for salespeople is to prove ROI to the potential customer?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of default behaviors that salespeople have. And part of the motivation of kind of why I started my business and why I started writing was that default behavior. This idea that we don't get trained. I start off the book talking about, I call the first chapter is called the Cobra Kai paradox, which I sense you might be a Karate Kid fan. I don't know. The 1984. I know there's now a YouTube series and so on, but I call it the Cobra Kai paradox. And the idea behind maybe I use the word paradox too often, but the idea behind the Cobra Kai paradox is this: in sales, you learn from your sensei, right? That's how we learn. There's no school. Maybe we do some training, but even the training, there's so many different kinds of training out there, is selected by your sales leadership team. And we end up growing up to be like the practitioner that our sensei taught us to be. And if our sensei was, can I swear on the show here?
Yeah.
If your sensei was an asshole, okay, then you grow up to be an asshole salesperson, right? But if your sensei was like a Mr. Miyagi kind of.
By the way, I'm laughing that your swear word was asshole. I thought you were going to bomb into your life. Asshole.
Damn.
All right, continue.
I don't want to dial it up too much.
The most Canadian thing you could have done. Like, can I swear? Asshole.
If I say it quietly, maybe people won't hear. So if you learn from your Mr. Miyagi kind of leader, then you grow up to be like that. And I was always like an outsider from a sales perspective. Like, when you ask salespeople, hey, do you like talking to salespeople? They all say no. The only people that say yes are the ones that have a professional curiosity. And then they say, oh yeah, I want to listen to salespeople because I want to hear how they do it, because I want to see, I want to compare it to how I do it. But in general, people don't like talking to salespeople. And I had this epiphany, especially at Salesforce, and even now, where I get prospected into by all manner of people. I'm sure you do as well.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, stop using these tactics. Like, you're ruining it for everyone when you do this, right? Like, because you're making people hate you, and when they hate you, they hate me. And so I realized, when I was at Salesforce, that I was not selling the way I buy. We were executing these tactics, which are not bad or unethical or categorically ineffective, but they just would never work on me. And I'm like, so why are we telling people to do this stuff, right? And so that's what I mean by the Cobra Kai paradox. That was actually my motivation for starting Cerebral Selling and trying to teach people to do it fundamentally the right way, not based on, modern, we're going to do social selling and LinkedIn voicemails and all that kind of stuff. That's fine. But just like the classical, how people make purchasing decisions, how to have human conversations with other human beings, kind of that help them. So this
Which
idea
stands the test of any technology change.
That's it. Well, you know what? When you read like some good books, and this was part of the motivation for my book as well. Some of the books are very timely, like they talk about a concept that's very relevant now.
Right.
But I love the books that are timeless, that you can read them 20 years from now and they're still amazing, right?
Well, there's a reason that we have internet like 5.0 at this point, yet people still talk about Think and Grow Rich, which came out in like 1936, right?
That's right. It's true. So I love these kind of timeless principles. And so back to like the paradox of ROI, why are people conditioned to sell ROI? Well, look, it's not a bad tactic. Hey, look, if I'm appealing to your reasonable mind and you're in a reasonable kind of, mindset, and hey, look, you're going to spend this money with them. You're going to make this money back. Like, it's an investment. It's no big deal. But we all know that like, that's not necessarily how people buy, because people value all sorts of different things. Like, I could say, look, if you spend money on insurance and you die, then you're going to get this money back. And you have to decide whether or not that's worthwhile. I could say, look, if you go to the gym and you lift all these weights, you're going to get strong. That only, and you're going to be able to do all these things, but that only works if you care about those things, right? So the things that people value, relationships, caring for the environment, insurance, safety, security, these all come back to feelings at the end of the day. And so that's the idea behind the paradox of ROI. It's not that ROI is bad, it's that it's incomplete as a message to send to people. Because I guarantee if I lined up 10 vendors right now and said, like, what's your ROI? What's the ROI of your solution? They all have one. There's a story, but it all comes down to, is it aligned with what I want? And do I believe that I can achieve that ROI, right? And so that's what we just do it because we're taught that way, but it's insufficient today to convert modern buyers.
You mentioned there are salespeople out there like ruining it for the rest of us. That happens to me probably almost every week, where I get like a really bad email, or one time actually it was a service I was considering purchasing. Ultimately I decided not to. And like the response email I got it was just like that classic like sleaze tactic where it was, they said in response, could you please tell me why you're not interested in saving X% on, and I'm like, are you fucking kidding me?
You swore just now, Raj. I just want to point that out.
Yeah.
Like a real swear word, not like my Canadian swearing.
Okay. So then when we think about the science behind this, so let's say I'm the seller here and I'm trying to explain the value of my product to you through the lens of ROI. And I'm telling you like, oh, it's going to be great. Your production costs are going to go down 20%. You're going to be, 35% more efficient. Long-term, you should see about, even a 15% increase in revenue at the end of the day. What's happening in your brain as I talk to you like that?
So I'm questioning all these assumptions, so where are you getting this data from? Is this applicable to me? Are you telling me this because this is what your best customers experience? Will I experience all of these things? How much of this is realistic? Is this a pitch? I'm thinking all these, like, I think you're lying to some extent.
Yeah.
And you're making certain assumptions to some extent about my business. And, I get that you're trying to sell me. I'm trying to dissect this for us here. You're trying to sell me the kind of the end result, which I get, but you're not really selling me. You're selling me the ROI still. You're selling me the the business value that I may or may not agree with, but you're still not selling me like the feeling. So for example, like, so what? All right, so great. So I save 20% in this, 30% on that, 10% of my time. Who gives a crap? Like, what's the so what at the end of the day? There's no emotional connection to the numbers. So and also, you sound like everyone else. Everyone says that, right? It's 20% this, 30% that. So I immediately, and here's the thing: as a salesperson, you might be like fresh out of boot camp, and you're like, oh my gosh, my sales leaders told me to sell this stuff, and it's not working. I don't get it. What's going on? Right? So you're not saying wrong or bad things, but as the buyer, these are all the things that are going through my mind.
I agree with you on that all the way through. And it's, to add another paradox in here, our third paradox of the episode. I think I mentioned this to you when we were doing a intro chat the other week, but about a year ago, and I've mentioned on this show before, but about a year ago, I released this ebook about this thing I call the X to Y paradox, which has to do with cold emailing. And what you'll see a lot of people do in their cold emails is they'll drop their like best customer example in the email. We helped so-and-so achieve 50% revenue gains or whatever it might be. Some like really good example. And it's not that they didn't do it, like it did happen. The challenge is that, as I see it, the person you're reaching out to who doesn't even know you yet is in a current state of X, right? The letter X. By giving them your best example, you have shown them a state of Y, like a future state, right? But they don't know you yet. And so they kind of like being in their state of X. And so when you give them a state of Y with the 50% revenue gain or whatever that might be, it's just too far of a leap for them because they kind of like where they are today. And so my advice, I'm basically summarizing, 20 pages here into a couple sentences, but is to deliver an X plus 1. So incremental gain that is more associated with feeling than anything else. So you can use a number, but in the context of first introducing how someone responded to it, or hey, so-and-so said it's been really helpful, for their organization. It said it's made life a lot easier, and it's also led to, and then just say some incremental gain that the person can wrap their head around. Because similar to this ROI thing, my layman's terms way of saying it is, you trigger the yeah, but brain, yeah, comma, but, where just as you were saying how you were kind of innately reacting before, the brain kind of goes into this either like one of two responses. Yeah, but what data did you fudge to make this sound good? Or you rationalize why your case is unique, and yeah, but we operate this way, so that wouldn't work for us, right? It's just when it's too good to be true, or it sounds too good to be true, the person is going to think it is too good to be true and not even want to respond or engage in an email or take the meeting. And that's what I think you're saying not only exists in the upfront, but even like as the sales process moves along. Is that accurate?
Yeah, back to this idea that ROI needs to be believable to have an impact. So if you start throwing out all these platitudes, and by the way, I'm not saying you shouldn't talk about that 50% leap customer, and you might have those customers on your website, right? And those things are not bad, but from a customer's perspective, they only serve to kind of get me to lean in and say, all right, this is interesting. Tell me more, hopefully. And you are in a position, and here's the other problem, that salespeople, when you're crafting these ROI, some people, here's the thing, you go out and you tell your customer, okay, you can achieve this 50% gain. But in the back of your mind, you know that not all of your customers are going to achieve that gain, right? That might be your best customer story in one instance, right? And then as you hear maybe sometimes stories of customers that were not so successful with your solution, you become a little bit emotionally encumbered. You're like, hold on, it's like, now I'm going out talking about this 50% thing. I know some customers aren't super successful. And then people can actually tell in your voice that you don't believe in what you're saying, right? And so part of the thing that we can do as sellers when we go and we talk about this ROI is not just talk about the business value and the return, but what those customers had to do, right? Like, what did they have to do to achieve that return? So in order to maximize the return, you need to do this. We need to do this. Like, this has to be kind of a perfect storm. Now we can, tweak these assumptions for you, but all it does is it gives that customer a level of confidence that, yes, they're going to see kind of a certain return, right? So, that's what I would say. Is like if you're bringing data, and the other thing you mentioned, which I think was great as well, is this kind of X+1, right? The idea is that when you throw out a message, a pitch, an ROI stat, the only thing that matters is it has to be believed. Dan Pink refers to this in his book as processing fluency. I say process because I'm Canadian. It's a processing fluency, right? This idea is like when I say something, how quickly is it digested? Now, if I start throwing out all these 50% numbers here, that's not going to, he calls it like it goes down smooth, like a nice scotch. It's not going to go down smooth in your brain. And so picking the right kind of numbers when you show your value is really important too. If I were to give you an example, I would say, let's say part of the value of your solution is it saves people time. Okay, you implement the solution, it's automated, blah, 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 boom, saves people time. How much time are we talking here? If I go out to you and I say, Raj, this solution, if you put this in, it's going to save 10% of your time every month, right? Or I could go out and I can say, Raj, if you put the solution in, it's going to save you 20 hours a month. Now, those two things might be mathematically equivalent, okay? But they are not processed in the same way by your brain. You can picture 20 hours a month. 10% of that, like, no, you can't. Now, I'm not saying it should always be the absolute number versus the percentage. Sometimes the percentage is the more compelling number. But the idea is the X+1, it's this idea predicated on, it's an idea that goes down smooth. I can get that, right? And so the way you present data and the way you present numbers is equally important.
Yeah, and one of the examples I give in that ebook, which I have, successfully used in my own outreach, is, I personally have a customer success story with one of my clients where their close rate was 12% on their demo calls. And we got it up to a 38% close rate. And then at one point, the rep was even hovering around like 45, 50% close rate. Now, I think it's too much to say this person had a 50% close rate or a 38% close rate or even, a 26% increase. Then you're thinking about, well, what's the gain there, right? So the way I phrase it instead is, hey, like I give like the little, like what they, like how they said it helped them just at like a qualitative level. And then add on to it. This was able to help them bring in a couple more deals every month. Which if you're a sales leader or a CEO, which is who I'm going after, you think about it in the lens of, man, if my reps could just close like 2 more deals every month, we'd really be in a good shape. They're not thinking about it, man, if we can get to a 26% increase in sales, right? Or if we can get, right? Or they're not saying, they also don't think about, man, if my worst person can just start closing all their deals, we'd be set, because they know that's not reasonable. Yes. So you're right. It's really about how you phrase it. And even in the example you gave where it's like, whatever it was, 10%
or 20 hours,
20 hours gain, it's even like even further than that. Or is it 20 hours per month, or is it 5 hours per week, or is it 1 hour per day? Right. And that's where you start to get into, I think, the persona of who you're selling to, and really thinking about, really coming from that like empathic lens, right? How do they think about their own day? Which comes back to that core theme, which is your book, which is selling the way someone buys. And buy is not just how do they buy things, it's how do they like intake information on a daily basis, right?
That's right. How they internalize. Well, here's a perfect example. So let's say I'm selling training, sales training. That's a stretch, right? So I actually do sell sales training. So the question is, when someone buys my sales training, what are they buying? Like what is there? Is it the ROI of sales training? Because sales training, is not the least expensive thing you can buy. And so it all depends on, well, why are you buying it in the first place? Are you looking for like a boost? Did you do a funnel analysis and you've determined that between discovery and negotiation, there's like a drop off and you're looking to impact that particular metric? And if you do, you will see a return. Maybe, but maybe, you want to invest in training because you've never invested in training before and you're worried that your team is going to leave because they don't feel like you're committed to their professional development. Right? So, or it could be that your team seems to lack a certain degree of confidence in their sales execution, right? They feel emotionally encumbered. And this is actually very true with young sellers. And I saw this all the time when I was at Salesforce. You have these young sellers who are super awesome, enthusiastic, and you go out and you give them these Cobra Kai tactics, and they feel emotionally encumbered. They start calling on senior level decision makers, and they have fear in their voice, okay? And they get their ass handed to them on these sales calls. And so
that was a 23-year-old me.
Well, totally. Well, it's anyone. Like, you could be a young seller, and that's a young seller selling to an older, more experienced buyer whose job they've never done, has this concept. I call it experience asymmetry, and I talk about it in my book. I wrote a Harvard Business article about it about a year ago. Experience asymmetry. But it's also a factor for new reps, new to your business, new to the industry, where you kind of go out, and it's kind of like, for those of you out there that have like little kids, when your kids come to you and they're about to hit you up for something, like ask you for something, like, you can tell immediately, right? Like, the same way when a telemarketer calls you, you can tell immediately that it's a telemarketer reading from a script, right? So people are very perceptive. So back to, like, what's the ROI of sales training? What would life be like if your reps could go out there with the confidence of someone who has 10 or 20 years more experience, like, in your space, right? What would the value of that be? And maybe that might be intangible. Like, it might be, there's a tangible value to the retention and, conversion rates, all this kind of stuff. So back to, like, well, okay, what's the ROI of sales training now? Now if I were to pitch my sales training, which one of those am I picking? Right? I don't want to just lead with this one if that's not what you care about. Maybe you have an employee attrition problem and lack of investment, and that's why you need to do this now. Or maybe you made the investment in training and you're like, shit, the stuff we did isn't working anymore. We need to do something else. So it's not just kind of one or the other. It's got to be aligned to what you believe, right, as the buyer.
Yeah. Well, it's aligning to what they believe. And to clarify, are you saying that you should inherently know what they believe, or you should actually ask in some fashion, hey, what's important to you? And then build your sort of customer story around that.
Yeah, well, this question, I actually saw a video someone posted on LinkedIn yesterday about not making assumptions. Like, don't make assumptions when you go into about what they care about. And I think that's totally valid. But I also do think that there are lots of considerations that people should have when they're making a purchase that are not top of mind for them, right? So, like, someone buying a car might be thinking, oh, this is a super fast car and 0 to 60 times really fast, but they may not be thinking about safety. But when I talk to them about safety, they might be like, oh my gosh, I never thought of that. That's actually really important. Or you could tow a boat or whatever, So I do think that as modern sellers, we do need to bring a little bit of that future to our customers and be prescriptive. In fact, Gartner, CEB, wrote an awesome article about, kind of the state of modern selling a few years ago that talked about the need for sales reps to be more prescriptive and lead their customers. Like, especially if it's a product that you're selling that your customers don't often buy. Like, I give the example, I go into the suit store to buy a sports jacket because I need a sports jacket because I'm giving talks and stuff. Now, look, I have some sports jackets. I don't buy sports jackets every week. I'm not a fashion guy. So I go into the store and I'm like, you got 1 million sports jackets in here. I'm trying to figure out which one to buy. And these salespeople at the menswear store, they're well trained, and they say, okay, they ask me questions. So this is the same thing we do in sales. We're trying to kind of size up our customer, get a sense for what they care about. And then once we do that, we don't have to have an exhaustive discovery. Then we start bringing suggestions. Okay, based on what I'm hearing from you, I'm going to kind of narrow down the field. And I have customers that do this, even like on discovery calls. They'll say, for example, what are you using today, like, to solve this problem? And based on the answer, if it's A, I go down this line of discussion. If it's B, I go down this line of discussion. So I have to do a little bit of discovery, but also I think our customers are relying on us to some extent to make suggestions about things that they don't focus on every day. Like, that's our job as sellers. Otherwise, why don't we just throw everything on a website and let people discover it on their own?
Right. And I think there's a good deal of honesty that's involved with that too, which can get tricky based on, like, competing conflicts of interest. But I would always say it's better to be honest and make a little bit less money than to lie and make more money, because it probably is going to come back to you in some very bad way pretty quickly.
Well, for sure. Like, think about it as a seller. One of the questions I ask is, like, did you ever sell your product to a customer when maybe after the fact you realize you probably shouldn't have sold it to them? Like, they're a bad customer, right? It's not that they weren't willing to buy.
Do you get a response on that they're like people generally say, yeah, that's happened before?
Absolutely. 100% of the time. And I say, okay, so it kind of goes back to this idea of, like, who are we for? Like, who's one of our, who's a good customer for us? And then I said, who's a bad customer? Who should we actually not be selling to? And I say not be selling. They're willing to buy from us. They're willing to give us money, but we shouldn't really be selling to them. And they all have suggestions. And I say, okay, great. what happens when we sell a product to someone who we shouldn't be selling it to, even though if they're happy to give us money, right? And they start saying, well, they're not happy. They call our support team. They gum up our whole process. We bring them into our kind of product roadmap, and they start making stupid suggestions for future development. And even worse, if that is a big influential customer, we start our product roadmap starts meandering, and we start building things that are not good for the rest of our customer base, and we get pulled further off course. So it's not just back to this, science of emotions. Salespeople are motivated to hit their number, and they want that big commission check. But this realization, like, what happens if we sell to the wrong customers? What happens? And ultimately, how does it come back to bite us? And every salesperson has those stories.
A different way to look at that at an organizational level is, I like to think of that as there's good money and bad money. You want good money. Good money informs the next dollar you should be making. Bad money either doesn't lead to your next dollar, or it actually takes away from the next good dollar you should be making. And it really comes down to, like, what, as you said, good customer, bad customer, right? Because it's like, could you make money off this? Yes. But do you want to keep making money off of a customer like that? If the answer is no, then why even get started down that path and then have to build out a whole new, like, revenue projection for stuff that you don't even want to be doing?
Totally. I mean, look, you can't be oblivious. Sometimes your customers do pull you in a good direction, right? Something that's aligned with your mission. But yeah, you don't want those bad fit customers. They just do come back to bite you. I think my message to sellers and their leaders would be, fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of times sellers are incentivized by their comp plans to bring on whatever customers we can. Right now, some more enlightened organizations will have, like, clawbacks if the customer churns, or you have a rep who's responsible for a certain territory and maintaining the revenue of that territory. So if they bring on a bad fit customer, it's kind of on them. So there's lots of things that people can do to build in kind of protections into their comp plans, which I recommend that you do, especially if you're a growth company, because you don't want to have those bad fit customers. They're bad for all sorts. They're not bad people, by the way, but they're bad for all sorts of reasons, right? And keeping focused is really important. And it also lets you sell with more conviction if you deal with a consistent set of customers all the time.
Before I forget, on today's episode, I want to take a quick step aside here and talk about a new partner of the show in Sales Hacker. If you're a longtime listener of this show, and we do a lot more conversations that are, generally speaking, sales or marketing based, like today with David. And a lot of the companies we'll feature have a B2B lens to them. So that's why I really like having Sales Hacker as a partner of Startup Hype Man, the podcast. If you're not familiar with them, they are the world's smartest community for forward-thinking B2B professionals. There's 135,000 members deep. So that means if you are a CEO, the head of sales, or a sales rep, or anywhere in between, Sales Hacker is going to help you get better at your job with podcasts, articles, webinars, and research from actual sales experts and practitioners, including moi, amongst many others. And on top of that, they also just released a brand new community feature to their website. So now, instead of it being passive content consumption, you can actually get involved in conversations on the site, start your own discussions. For example, I was just on the site the other week, and someone posed a question about what's the best way to break the ice with someone through LinkedIn messaging. And there was like hundreds of responses to that. It was really cool to see. Of course, I chimed in and said, well, I just send people this video of me rapping the Fresh Prince, but about Startup Hype Man. And that seems to work pretty well in breaking the ice. In any case, all that conversation that we had happened on Sales Hacker. So check them out. The brand new Sales Hacker is at www.saleshacker.com. You can get the articles, the podcast, the research, and the full-on community discussions now at saleshacker.com. Today on Startup Hype Man, the podcast, we are talking with David Priemer, the founder of Cerebral Selling and the author of Sell the Way You Buy. We're talking about the paradox of selling ROI, which is a big theme in his book. We've talked a lot. We had a really good conversation thus far. David, what I want to still ask you about is essentially when you're in the moment with someone, naturally they are so I guess it's one thing to say, like, if they say this, you know, you're going to go down this track, right? Your track A, your talk track A, B, and C. If they say, you know, this is our issue or this is a product we're looking for. It's another thing where in the moment you're already in discussion with them and they're like, yeah, okay. What kind of results has this gotten for others? Or something to that effect where they want to know how it's helped other customers. And in that case, for most people, the default reaction is to go, oh, well, we help so-and-so achieve X%, right? Like go right back into that ROI mode. So how do we plan for, I guess, fighting that natural response? And what should the response be instead?
I'm about to go. So when you said, well, you know, I think you said, you know, in an intimate moment, I was like, oh, where are we going with this conversation? It's like Raj after dark here. So, no, so here's the thing with case studies. I have this planned rant that I'm going to do. I don't know if it's going to be a video or an article or something, but here's the thing with case studies. When someone says, so what have other customers seen? What we tend to do is we tend to fall back on the case studies that our organizations have provided to us, right? Something that's on our website. Oh yeah, well, like Raj Nation saw a 50% growth in this. And then, you know, Steve Nation saw a 20% growth in that. And
there's a Steve Nation out there. There's going to be some fists flying, I'll tell you that much.
Well, there's Dave the Man, and I don't know what the other thing you
Portugal
said.
The Man.
Portugal the Man. There's a lot of nations. So here's the thing, right? When I start reading statistics to you, right? Statistics that I have not felt or internalized or that are on a case study, you could just read them yourself. They come off sounding like this. You ever go into like a Best Buy or your electronics store and you're looking at a stereo or a TV and you ask the salesperson, so like, tell me about this TV. And they look at the little like sticker that's underneath the TV display and they start reading that. Okay, idiot, I could have done that myself, right? So I feel that when someone says, what has this customer experienced? And we just start like reading things, like that's kind of how we sound like. And so one of the ways you can do better on that front. And I kind of call this this concept, removing the concept of abstraction. So actually, Adam Grant, so I'm a big fan of Adam Grant, Wharton School. I'm a big fan of Adam Grant. And, you know, one of the things he talks about is he did this study with the alumni department of the Wharton School of Business. And the BDRs in the alumni department call up alumni and they ask them for money, for donations. And they found that, you know, what are people doing? They're going out and they're calling alumni and they're saying, hey, you know, you should donate to the Wharton School. I know you went here and we use the money for scholarships and the scholarships help people and all these great. So they're talking about like these case studies, right? And so what he did was now here's the thing. Those are just like statistics on a piece of paper. Like it's like an academic exercise. I'm just reading the stuff that's underneath the stereo. So what he did was he had some students who received scholarships that were a result of alumni donations, and he had them come in and tell the BDRs firsthand stories of their lives and the impact those scholarships had. And they found that the revenue from the BDR team increased 400%. Okay. Now those statistics may not have been any different than something that they could have read on a case study. But the fact, this idea of abstraction is kind of this mental barrier that we put between concepts. It's why we don't give money to starving children in Africa, because we say, oh, like that's happening over there. It's like, I don't know, it's like it's out of sight. Even, you know, we look at the pandemic, and I'm not saying maybe you do give to starving children in Africa, and that's awesome. You know, even with the pandemic, here in North America, we were not the first to be hit by the pandemic. But when we're reading these stories of overseas, like, oh, that's happening over there. Right.
I even often say that's one of the main issues with Chicago and the gun violence here is people are like, it's on the south side. It's only like 3 miles away, but people are like, oh, it's happening on the south side. So they don't bother to, you know, pay attention to it.
That's right.
It's not good, but that's kind of the reality of the situation.
Abstraction. But that's, as human beings, we have to do that, because if we subjected ourselves to all the pains of the entire world, like we couldn't survive. Like that's how our brains keep us safe and moving forward. So this idea of abstraction, when we read a case study, and we have these statistics and we just recount them, we often do it with like less passion and conviction. But so here's the trick. If you're in sales, if you have some of your actual customers who have achieved this ROI or any benefit come back to you and tell you a story. I have one of my clients, I tell this story all the time. They said, you know, David, we used one of your discovery tactics and that was the one we latched onto the most. And we were experiencing a ramp time typically of reps of like 3 to 4 months until they were at full productivity. The only change we did was start using that tactic, and all of a sudden now we're getting full productivity out of reps 3 weeks into the job. Like we found like the switch. And I tell that story all the time. Why? Is there an ROI to it? I mean, I'm not talking about dollars and cents. I'm talking about ramp time. But because the customer told me that story, I can recount that story with so much passion and conviction.
Mm-hmm.
So back to like customer asks me, so what's the benefit of your solution? Now you're a seller. If, for example, here's how you answer. Instead of saying company A saw 50% and company B saw 20%, you say, I spoke to Mary at company A and she does this job. And she was telling me that before she did this and now she does this. And she couldn't believe that it was such a huge transformation, just this little thing. And now I'm telling you the same story, but it's like a first-hand account that I'm telling with much more passion and conviction. So it becomes a lot more believable. And then you are more likely to act just like those BDRs in the kind of the Adam Grant, alumni school. So it's not the numbers, it's how you heard about them and how you assimilate them and how you tell them that has the biggest impact.
I'm curious then, let me give you like my framework that I do for this and what I recommend to clients as well. And I'd love to see you add to it, take away from it, pick it apart, whatever you feel. So I always think, or not always, but the general framework I like to work from when explaining a customer success story is start with the qualitative. Well, start with why this person you're talking to reminds you of someone else, and then go into the qualitative result they got. So like the feelings result. From there, dial it back to number 3, which is where were they originally? Next is, so what did you do about it? Like what software did they buy? Like, etc. After that, drop the quantitative result in context and then wrap it up by restating the qualitative result. So you bookend it with qualitative result. Now in that framework, so relate to why that buyer reminds you of the other person, qualitative, quantitative, original state, what you did, results, quantitative, back to qualitative. What's your take on that framework?
You know what, as you're telling me that, I mean, it's a lot of steps, but here's the thing I kept thinking of as you're telling me that. It's a narrative, right? And people are conditioned to follow narrative. I'm a big fan of this. And actually, we talked about messaging in our kind of prior call. I'm a big fan of, you're going to laugh, hopefully not, infomercials. I love infomercials. Like you watch the Shopping Channel and these kinds of things.
I'm a sucker for infomercials.
Love my shit out of infomercials.
Oh no, they're using the lightning bolt graphic. You're hooked.
Well, because here's the thing, like why are infomercials so great? Because you're not expecting them. You start out the commercial not giving a shit about what it is they're talking, and at the end you're like, I need that. How did I not survive without like my NutriBullet, thing, or my Miracle Blade 2000? So they take you on this narrative, and the narrative is kind of and so your narrative can work great. The narrative is something that is absorbed by the mind. It's very engaging because we're conditioned over the course of our human history. We passed our history and important facts through narratives and stories. So humans are conditioned, and actually this is an interesting thing from the perspective of the science of selling. They found, and this is research, I think it was done in 2014, they found that like the oxytocin and chemicals that are released in the brain when stories are told and absorbed, they can actually measure these things now. And so they have a better sense for like what stories work and what don't. So the arc of a story, even if it's an infomercial or like a 5-second pitch or your narrative, it takes people on this journey. And if you hit the arc in the right way, then they're going to be entrenched. It's the same way when you watch like Star Wars or a Pixar movie. You're like, this is awesome, right? When you watch a story that kind of has a meandering kind of tale, it just doesn't have the same impact. So I love kind of formulaic approaches as long as it's something that people can, like human beings can actually, do and articulate. Because in your example of like X to Y, oftentimes in a lot of sales systems, they say, talk about the customer's future state. Talk about they're here, you want to move them to there, here's what there looks like. I think that's great. But then if you're a salesperson, you're thinking to yourself, okay, what are the words that I'm supposed to use to do that? And what you've done is you've kind of broken that down step by step, saying, here are the words, right? And I think that's a big challenge for sellers is kind of overcoming that knowing doing gap. It's like, I know that I need to create contrast, but okay, what are the words? What are the numbers? What are the words that have the biggest impact? What's the formula? What's the arc? And so I think when you can help people do that and have a formula to help them articulate values in a very natural way, a very human sounding way, because when you watch a movie, you're not like, oh my gosh, they're doing this to me. It's like, no, like you're an infomercial. It just happens in your brain. Like it's that effortless purchase. And I think that's what you want to achieve by this formulaic approach.
Breathing a sigh of relief over here.
I think it sucks. I was just trying to be nice. No.
By the way, I've definitely pulled you over to the dark side because you didn't even recognize. I don't know if you realize it, but you did say shit like casually in your monologue there.
Yeah, so well, you let the tiger out of the cage.
Off of that initial point of can I say asshole to casually dropping shit.
Maybe we'll get to an F-bomb by the end of the show. I don't know. You got to keep listening, everyone.
All right, so let's begin our wrap up then. Where can our listeners find you, learn more about Cerebral Selling, as well as find the book?
Yeah, so I mean, everything I put on cerebralselling.com, the website. So just one word, Cerebral Selling. I give everything away for free. It's kind of part of my strategy. You don't have to register. There's nothing gated or anything like that. You can sign up to my email list if you'd like. I have a YouTube channel also that's linked on my website. It's called Cerebral Selling, which you can find. And the book is called Sell the Way You Buy, which you can find on my website as well. Or you can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Indigo, wherever you buy books. Sell the Way You Buy. There you go.
All right. Now to wrap up, we will each give our top 1 or 2 lessons or takeaways for the listeners based on today's discussion. The topic was the paradox of selling ROI. I'll go first and I'll toss it to you, David. Yeah. So to me, the big wrap up to this for me, and it's not just about the ROI, but really the larger theme of your book, which is sell the way you buy. What I have realized more and more really over the last 6 months and especially 3 months is the value in actually being a buyer of something to understand how to be better at selling, which is what your book is about, right? Sell the way you buy. And I find the more I am in a position where I am the buyer, I'm like, I don't like how they did that. Or, oh, I wouldn't do it that way. Or I really like how they asked me that question, right? And I actually think more reps should get trained by not just learning how to sell, but actually, I don't know, give them like $100 stipend and they are tasked with having to like buy a piece of software or something on behalf of the company, or at least get pulled into a vendor discussion with maybe their sales leader. Because once you see those things, once you see how someone else is doing it and you're on the receiving end of it, very quickly you're like, oh my God, I do that too. And I really hate how that felt like. So I think just thematically, more sellers should put themselves in the position of being not a simulation, but an actual thing where you have to buy something. And then specifically to the ROI side of it, as I have been an advocate for a long time, and you've got science to back it up, is emotions and feelings prevail at the end of the day. Numbers don't mean shit if they don't have any meaning behind them. David, top 1 or 2 lessons or takeaways for the listeners.
That's it. I think we're in agreement. This idea of sell the way you buy, the one thing I'll slightly disagree with you on in a lovely Canadian friendly kind of way is that I don't think we need to give people $100 stipends to buy things. I think you buy things all the time, and the same pathways that exist in those purchases. Like, if you like, for example, a simple question I ask people is I say, if I just asked you to write down everything you bought for lunch in the last month, and then I took that list and I showed it to your doctor, what percentage of the time would your doctor say that, Raj ate the best thing for him, calorically, food groups, portion size, right? And like you laugh, okay? And if I said, okay, great, you went on vacation, and I believe that you believe there's an ROI to going on vacation, but why did you go there? Couldn't you have gone to this other place? Like, what was the ROI of that? Or you spring for the business class upgrade on your trip to Paris, even though you don't have the money because you're like, oh man, that would be awesome, business class. So I believe we make these decisions every day on the micro and macro level. And if you just step back and inspect that kind of the pathways and mechanisms by which you made that decision, and whether or not that decision was the best one for you, how you reconcile the value of it, you will come to the conclusion, right, that you need to do more of that. I'd say selling the way you buy, but sell the way you buy hopefully for everyone should just be like a catalyst to really dive down and inspect how you as a consumer make purchasing decisions of all sizes, because it absolutely translates, because at the end of the day, purchasing decisions are mostly made by human beings and we all are subject to the same forces. So sell the way you buy, just be super curious, keep learning, and look for clues in life around you to help inform your selling motion.
My final question, which is how I finish every episode, fill in the blank. Entrepreneurship is blank.
The first thing that came to, if I'm doing the word association, I said fun. I think it's just fun. So much learning, so much winning and losing. It's a roller coaster. Life is short. There's so much fun to be had. I have fun by learning. I think people, by learning and progressing, I think most of us do. So I said, the first thing was fun. And then now I think about it, it's like, oh, but it's tough, but no, it's fun. I'm a huge fan of entrepreneurship. It's tough, but oh man, what a ride. It's awesome.
Entrepreneurship is fun, parentheses, but also tough.
But also tough. Maybe rewarding. Maybe that's what it should be, right? But no, I'll stick with fun. Sticking with fun. Shit. All right. Now
how emphatic curse.
Yeah.
He is David Priemer. Go pick up his book, Sell the Way You Buy, on Amazon or any bookstore if you find yourself walking into bookstores these days. David, thank you so much for joining us today on this episode of Startup Hype Man, the podcast.
Oh, my pleasure, Ross. Thanks so much for having me. It's awesome.
That wraps up today's conversation. Did you like what you heard? Startup Hype Man, the podcast, is available on every major platform, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, and more. So be sure to subscribe on your platform of choice and leave a rating and review. Do you want to be an upcoming guest on the show? Email media@startuphypeman.com with your idea, and my team will review. Our theme song is Change the Game by Jay-Z, all rights owned by Rockefeller and Def Jam Records. And hey, if you want to work together on making your startup story the only one that matters, email me at rajiv@startuphypeman.com. That's RAJIV@startuphypeman.com. Well, that'll do it for today. Thank you for listening. Thank you to today's guests for joining. You have been checking out Startup Hype Man, the podcast. I'll catch you next week. But in the meantime, word up, raise up.